everything in a dream is an aspect of you. Therapy is fundamentally hopeful. It is fundamentally optimistic. If you're angry with anger or angry with fear, that's more energy for fear and anger. And that's what really the book is about, taking people through that process of, I suppose, dialing down the threat place, dialing down the fear and anger, and how to do that through thoughts, feelings, body, behavior, relationships with others, and then turning up connection.
John-Paul Davies, welcome to the Mind Forest podcast.
Thanks very much.
So I've been sort of sitting, listening to lots of different mental health, wellbeing, therapy-based podcasts and videos, and I came across your channel. So that led to me checking out your website and finding your wonderful book, Finding a Balanced Connection. It's packed with information. Mm-hmm. There's a lot in there.
Yeah.
If it's not too broad, what do you understand as a balanced connection? What are some of the key points towards that? And then perhaps we can dive into some of those.
Sure. So the model initially that sort of stuck in my mind was from something called compassion-focused therapy, where there's a belief or based on neuroscience, I guess, and physiology, that there are three main systems with any human being. I know it's not going to appeal to everybody, the idea of sort of systems, and that's the nice thing about therapy, is there's all sorts of different things, alchemy, planes of consciousness, all sorts of things that people can listen to, chakras, whatever it might be. But that one really appealed to me, that there are three places. The first one is threat, which is where fear and anger are. Protective, so that's the thing that keeps us alive. Survival, as I say, fear, anger, hatred, revulsion, disgust. Where that's dominating, you can see that that's what brings a lot of people into therapy. For example, anxiety would sit there, I believe, that dominating. Anger, chronic anger. And then, of course, people may go to addictive behavior to make that feel better, to get themselves, because nobody wants to feel like that all the time. So there's that threat place. Then in the middle there is reward and drives. So competing for resources, having more than other people, money, status, sex, food. So it's the drive to do things. And a particular one, as I say, in relation to other people, I think is competition to win, to have more than, so better than, less than. Which you can see the threat, the place of fear and anger, is a place of disconnection, probably from self and others. The place of reward and drive, similarly, it's disconnected because it's about being better than or less than in relation to other people. And then there's the third system, which is, or the third place, which we will occupy, which is where happiness sits, I think, largely for people. And that's the place of connection with self and others. So friendship sits there, affiliation, love of the world, community, feeling part of a wider community, self-esteem, so connected to self, knowing your own worth and value, pets, and love of anything, including self. And so the basic premise is that naturally human beings, we're weighted in favour of survival. So we're weighted in favour of that threat place, which will naturally dominate. And then what human beings do to help ourselves to feel better, because we don't want to feel frightened or angry or hateful, is we might go to behaviours and substances, the sort of drives to help ourselves to feel better. Of course, also internally, if all we see is problems, it is the place also, could be a non-existent sense of self, but certainly low self-esteem, and to go to competition with others, being better than others, status, appearance, is a way of compensating for that, I suppose, is a way of feeling better about ourselves, but we're doing it in relation to other people. And I think that's the next place people often go. People will bounce backwards and forwards between feeling fearful potentially and helping themselves to feel better, perhaps through comparisons with others, to being better than others. And the place that's often last for people and comes last, and you can only be in one at a time, would be that place of connection with self and others. So the idea of balance, I suppose, is that we need them all. We absolutely need to survive. We can't love anybody or eat if we're dead. So we need to have that fear and anger place, we need some drives. We need to be able to, because it's about goals, achieving goals, the next thing. And that's good for excitement, it's good for novelty, but we don't want those to dominate over connection with self and others, because, as I say, they're really, in some ways, certainly the threat place is a disconnecting place for people. Loneliness, isolation, anger at the world, anger itself too. So the balance is to have things largely weighted in favour of connection, and to have some drive and probably a little bit of threat, because fundamentally, I mean, I know this is quite a privileged place from which I can say that, is that our physical safe, we are largely physically safe, psychologically safe. Again, there are people who are in situations where they are not, clearly, but most of the people in my client group, for example, would be physically, psychologically safe. So we need less energy in that. And of course, then you get, trauma throughout life, whether that is bullying, difficult things that have happened to people, or a lack of love, a lack of connection in life, also turn that threat place up, turn fear and anger up, and probably impulsivity and a tendency to go to the behaviours and substances too. So the idea behind the book is consciously putting energy into that place of connection with self and others, so that people lead a more fulfilled and happy life. Connection is the place of meaning and purpose, rather than finding problems. But as I say, we need a bit of all of them. So, and that's what balance is about. A lot of people will come in if they're anxious and say they don't want to be anxious anymore. Or in terms of addictions, they don't want to be dependent on food or exercise or whatever it is anymore. The thing that we have to realize is those are an intrinsic part of human beings. So to turn against them actually only fuels it. If you're angry with anger or angry with fear, that's more energy for fear and anger. So we need to actually connect to them. So I think we need to respond to our fear and to our anger to say, what is it that you've got a valuable message. What is it you're trying to say? And the same with the drives. Thank you very much for moving me through life in terms of goals, but there are adverse consequences because this is dominating so much. So how are we going to manage that? And that's what really the book is about, taking people through that process of, I suppose, dialing down the threat place, dialing down the fear and anger, and how to do that through thoughts, feelings, body, behaviour, relationships with others, and then turning up connection. That's what really the structure is based on.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think what really spoke to me in the book was the focus on connection, because in the sort of not necessarily self-help, in the sort of well-being sphere, often there is a focus, especially in the algorithms I pick up on anyway, on trying harder, doing more, being better. And a lot of these are valid, but they can be very cognitive. Me personally, I'm someone who is quite top heavy, spend a lot of time in my head, very cognitive. So I think it's nice that there's a focus on self-development that isn't just cognitive, isn't just based on thinking about something better or thinking harder. You're placing an emphasis on the other, on that connection, which is actually in a way a boundary dissolver, because we put up a lot of boundaries around others. So that kind of made sense to me. And one you set the scene in the book. You talk a lot about being in a place of threat. And I think a lot of people do exist in a place of threat. And as you've just mentioned, that can be helpful. However, I imagine when clients come to you, they may not even realize they're in a place of threat. So how do you sort of lead them to that realization or self-realization? What are some of the tools you use to lead them to that?
I mean, yes, most people, they would experience, I mean, some people may have been diagnosed with anxiety, so it might make sense to them if I frame that as threat, that is something that is dominating for them. Most of us, how we're thinking, what we're saying, we don't even think about. 80 to 90% of what we think, say, probably would do as well. The behaviours would be unconscious. We're pattern forming, programmed to do in the past, programmed to do in the future what we've done in the past. So we're not really thinking about it. So one of the key things about therapy is being conscious about what we're doing, what we're thinking. So I would pick somebody up if say pick somebody up, but point out if somebody's said something which is attacking about self. So I did that because I was stupid, or I know it's irrational to think that kind of thing. What does irrational mean? We are experiencing fear and have probably knocked memory, cognition, and those sorts of things offline. And I think if you look at it as absolutely a fundamental human experience, and that it's very common for human beings. Some people just worry about flying. Somebody else will worry about their physical appearance. Somebody else is worrying about their partner cheating on them. It's all from that part. Then that's also connecting with other people as well. So I suppose I would also always be looking at what somebody says, as far as ways in which they say it in their language. And of course, there's always the relational things as well. Generally, if somebody is fearful, some people, when they get protective, will get irritable, might be quick to anger. It doesn't often happen within the therapy room because it's not really that sort of situation, which is conflictual. But sometimes, the thing about as a therapist is connecting with my own experience of somebody, my own nervous system as well. And there are some ways in which people are, some things that they say that will start to have an effect on my nervous system too. So it's always how to observe those things and reflect them back to somebody without in any way being shaming or critical or perceived as critical, which is difficult, of course, if somebody struggles with self-esteem and has quite a fluid sense of self. How do you say something may be happening in relationship, so I suppose I would frame it as something which could be potentially disconnecting in relationship, and how we're looking at ways in which you connect. Most people are, have an underlying love for the people in their lives, an underlying attachment. The thing that causes people difficulty is rupture and repair, is how often there's a break in that, and how intense that break is, and how quickly they get to repair. So, rather than necessarily getting into the argument or anything kind of as I say, confrontational or argumentative, it's looking at, the part that gets triggered in that moment. Even if somebody's getting angry, they're feeling threatened, they're trying to protect themselves, that's the purpose of that part. But how do we deal with it in a way which is going to get their need met, rather than some escalating argument? So it's when people tell stories, I'll think about it in terms of connection, disconnection. I mean, for some people, they don't even, the concepts wouldn't come into the room. But as I say, in terms of a paradigm, it would be the way that I would be thinking about lots of things. What part is that's at work at the time? And that's not unusual, of course, in terms of therapy. There's all sorts of different things now, internal family systems, which again has that concept of parts with people. A lot of the big schools of thought now Freud, superego, ego, id, he was recognizing different parts in human beings as well, and the parts that they play, and the potential conflict, of course. So I would look for language. You might look at if somebody's late payment, turning up late, what they'll talk about, not being able to talk about anything, not having curiosity about self. Some people will fill the space the whole time. Other people may not say very much at all. So how does that all work from the point of view of connection with self? What's that like for somebody in relationship? So there's all sorts of different ways, really. You can look at it, as I say, with the thought. Some people are more cognitive, so they like something a bit more neuroscience. Some people are more body focused. Some people, you can look at dreams, daydreams. What is somebody doing with their imagination? All sorts of different ways that it can come into the room.
Nice. And then within your book, you sort of have 10 principles you work off, and I think one of the early ones is taking responsibility.
Yeah.
And this is a theme that's actually like peppered up throughout different podcast episodes I've had. Right. I've spoken to people from different sort of healing or development disciplines, and the first stages are always very similar. They're based around self-awareness and taking responsibility. Ultimately, I think one of the hardest lessons in life is learning that you can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I know that can sound potentially like you're positioning yourself above someone as a healer or a helper, but that's not how I mean it in that context. I'm just talking about from a place of compassion. But taking responsibility ultimately is our life, and no matter what we've been through, we're the ones who have to seek help. What are some of the common barriers or challenges you see to people making that initial step to taking responsibility for themselves?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you look at something like anxiety, it's very problem focused in terms of going out. It's about identifying threats. When it's turned inwards, when that lens is turned inwards, it's very much about what's wrong with me. Difficulties, it's used to catastrophize in the future, to sort of afterburn and reach forward. So afterburn, what did I say then? They don't like me. All those sorts of things. None of that territory is about connecting mind with the body to say, well, do I like that person? Am I doing something that I love? It's all about hypervigilance, often scanning the environment. And processing that. Is that a problem I need to solve? Are they a problem? Do I come away from them because they're a problem? So that sort of territory, if somebody's occupying that a lot, it is not the place of reflection on, it's survival. You don't need to reflect on yourself in order to survive. Similarly, if you're looking at acquiring more resources, getting more stuff, winning compared to other people, it's really, again, pretty externally focused, and probably only really focused on external aspects of self. Your house, your appearance, your weight, your physical body. So again, you can see that there is not really the place of actually, am I enjoying this? As long as I have more than the other, or have what I need to have to look like I fit, or I'm successful in society, then that's enough. And I think what often people find, I was talking yesterday on a podcast about people coming into therapy middle age, is that people find after a while that it doesn't really add. I mean, once you've got enough, there's a law of diminishing returns, really, as far as that acquiring more stuff. And it will never be enough, and you'll always want more in order to get the high. Yes, so from a taking responsibility point of view, the only place in which you will do that, I think, is connection with self, and probably connection with others. If I'm looking at connection with self, one of the things that, as I said, is connecting with your thoughts, feelings, your body. And in order to, one of the things about taking responsibility, I suppose, is to know what's happening internally, to know what your responses are to people and why you're having them. And again, none of this is from the point of view of blaming or fault, and I think that can often be what's in the way for people. Is if you're looking from a threat point of view, things are good, bad, it's your fault, it's my fault, I'm going to be angry with you, or you can be angry with me, you need to say sorry for me for being bad, or okay, I'm the bad one, I will say sorry. So it's a very sort of binary way of looking at things. So in some ways, I don't know whether taking responsibility as point number one on it can be off-putting for people, because if we're coming at it from a place of fear or anger, it sounds like what I'm trying to say is it's your fault, because that's often the language that people might use. Fundamentally, nobody can change my life apart from me, and I think what you're saying there in relation to other people, nobody can change someone else's life apart from them. Of course, it would make my life easier if everybody around me behaved in the way that I would like them to, but fundamentally, that's not actually something I can control that much with other adults. So, yes, so taking responsibility is I do wonder the impact that it has on somebody reading a self-help book for the first time, but it just means actually it's meant to be something that's empowering in some ways. It's, if you look at depression, somebody's sense of agency over their life sits outside of themselves. The thing about taking responsibility, it's meant to be a reflection of the fact that actually agency lies within you. That is not in any way your fault, but it's looking in a situation, how do you take responsibility for your part? Because it's only by you changing your response, reaction, or leaving even, or communicating something differently, or putting boundaries in a different way. And if that doesn't work, then leaving, whatever it might be, that's the only way it's going to really be different. But as I say, I don't think threat, I don't think reward are really the places of that. They're doing other things. Their purpose is elsewhere. So I can see why, if somebody isn't necessarily that connected to themselves, why it might seem a bit of an alien concept for people.
Yeah, Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it can be intimidating to take responsibility, because there might be things you've been avoiding,
Sure.
which you then have to face
Yeah.
if you do take responsibility, and we'll all have those in our lives. But yeah, ultimately it's the starting point. And then the next point is sort of gaining self-awareness, which may sound obvious, but I cruised through most of my life, without awareness of large aspects of myself. And I'm sure many of us have done that. We know there are many ways to gain self-awareness, sort of meditation, dream analysis, journaling, listening to speakers, podcast therapy. But I was just curious, what are some of the methods you've used in your life to gain self-awareness? I'd be interested to hear about that.
Yeah, so it would be, I remember some did answer some questions for something, and they said about other people that you listen to. What do you suggest other people read? And one of the main things that I would suggest that people do, I mean, in terms of, as you say, mindfulness meditation, is actually, rather than necessarily listening all the while to other people, one of the primary things is somebody needs to be listening to themselves. So I think through a lot of our lives, people, that whatever that link is between what's going on in the body and us registering it and working out why, people become disconnected from it. People go through entire school lives having to stay in an environment where they might enjoy some things, but probably not a lot of it. Some people dislike all of it, and they have to spend from 8 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and some staying there. And the result of that is a disconnection. So coming back into connection with that, as you say, is of primary importance if we're going to make anything different. And also, a lot of people don't know where they want to go or what they want to do. If you look at career change, for example, people will say, well, I know I don't like this, but I don't know what I like. I don't know what I enjoy. And again, that's because that connection between mind and body, mind and nervous system, however you look at it, I think it just wasn't just not necessary in order to go through life and succeed. It was actually problematic if somebody was doing it. Right. And in family environments as well. If you're with a frightened parent, nobody's either or, but somebody who's dominated by that and a frightening one, which is a common coupling, your nervous system would probably say you need to leave. And that's absolutely not possible for children. They have to attach, they have to love, they have to stay and go towards the frightening person. And again, you can see that disconnects somebody from their body. I know this isn't quite your question. It is, how do you get back into contact with that?
Absolutely. No, it's good context. Yeah.
But certainly, as far as doing that, it's, I don't think it's much more. I would have started with mine with body scans. So I would just notice bodily sensations whenever I could. And then I would, when I was talking to people, and of course when I'm with clients I would start to notice what was happening in my body, if there was a moment of connection with clients, and also then of course with people generally, what that felt like. If I noticed that I was getting triggered for some reason, I suppose my threat place getting triggered, what did that feel like in my body? Of course, during therapy training, all those kind of things come up for people. So ideally, and usually it's talked about in sort of a non-judgmental, sort of accusatory way. People are curious about what's happening. So it was a process over time, I would say, and it's putting your attention into it. Whatever you give your attention to grows. So if you start to notice, what is that sensation here? What do I have a sensation in my hands? I'm enjoying this with this person. I know I like them. What does that feel like in my body? The more you do it, the more your being does it. I think it grows over time. So, and of course, the more importance because really what's the reason for looking at your nervous system is actually, I think, for looking at what somebody's emotional situation, what your emotional responses are. And the more you look at them, the bigger they get, actually. The more you give your attention to something, I think the more it signals back. And if you don't dismiss it and are critical of it, they grow. So it would be that. So it started really, as I say, Insight Timer is an app which has got lots of body scans, lots of mindfulness things, lots of meditations, all sorts of different people from around the world taking you through whatever voice, person, accent you like. And I would do quite a lot of that. And of course, which is great, being in particular environments with other people, like I was today. Yep. Somebody would notice that if somebody's getting triggered and say, what's happening for you? Rather than engage in an argument. So the other important thing, isn't it, is looking at relationship with self. You're connecting with self, whether that's through a body scan, through relationships with others. It's really important, I think, to be have trusting relationships with other people as well.
Nice. Yeah. I think the point you mentioned around being more aware of your own body, that particularly resonates with me, because as I mentioned, probably typical of a lot of young men, just spent a lot of my life living in my head, being quite disconnected from my emotions. And that wasn't a conscious process, I don't think, or something that anyone even put onto me. I think that was just naturally how I was inclined and how I developed. But that comes to a point where you realize you can't think your way out of every situation.
No.
Sometimes you need to feel your way out a little bit too, and get that feedback from the outside world and keep feeling. Is dream analysis something you're big on, something you delve into much into your
Sometimes
practice?
I wouldn't say big on it necessarily. I mean, the course that I did, it was a transpersonal, but it was an integrative course, which means all the main schools of psychotherapy. The transpersonal side of things has got a bit of a spiritual side of things, and I think they base a lot on Jung, and he wrote a lot about dreams. So dreams came up a lot. They had a couple of techniques that they taught. Sort of waking dream technique, where somebody would bring their dream to a session and then talk as if they were in the dream. And there are other ways of dealing with it too. So it would sometimes come up with people. Again, some people very feeling focused, very much connected to their bodies, talk about a sensation they're having, even if I don't ask them. Other people very cognitive. Some people will bring their dreams. Other people, if I say, do you dream? Somebody will say, no, I don't. I mean, I think we all do, but certainly if it is, it can be very helpful. The concept that I liked from the training that I did was that every aspect of a dream, everything in a dream is an aspect of you. So if it's a person, even if it appears to be somebody else who's in your life, is looking at it from that point of view, and what's the relationship like. That kind of thing. So it certainly comes up sometimes. I do like it from the point of view of it being a way of somebody reflecting and being curious about their life, which is fundamentally what's needed for therapy, is for us to have curiosity, whether somebody's doing that through their dreams, whether somebody's wondering what's happening in their body. It's all about that sort of curiosity. So and the other thing is that, there's dreams. People like them, of course, because there's no consciousness around. So Royal Road to the unconscious, I think that was Freud that said that. But also I think daydreams can be helpful as well. Okay. Often people don't. So what we use our imagination for, some people might, fantasize about being famous or have superpowers or overpowering other people or whatever it might be. And is looking at what might be quite embarrassed to say it, but what's happening in the imagination is it's trying to do something, isn't it? What are we doing with it? It's just being curious about something, and that's hard. People are brave. If they haven't, I know it doesn't sound like to say what you daydream about is a big thing to talk about, but for a lot of people, if somebody is embarrassed about it, if there is shame around it, to say that to another human being, to trust somebody enough to talk to them about it is an amazing thing. But when people do, then, as I say, rather than being frightened of it, disconnected from it, people can just be curious about what's happening, whether that's dreams, daydreams. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I hadn't thought of daydreams actually as being too relevant. No, that's really interesting. So yeah, lots of really valuable sort of reflections there on awareness, sort of self-awareness, responsibility. So sort of these are based on connection with self.
Yeah.
Moving on to connection with others. So one of that is again one of your 10 points. So you talk about priorities of the dying in the book.
Yeah.
My first job was actually at a hospice.
Oh, was it?
So okay. I had a bit of experience working around people end of life in my sort of early to mid 20s, which was really interesting. But I saw people who were sort of letting go and happy. I saw people who had resentments. I saw people in some really sad situations. Others who kind of had really beautiful endings, and kind of everything in between. But you speak in your book about how the common regrets from people at end of life is not forgiving, not telling people how they feel, and they're all addressed around connection with others rather than accumulation of things. So what are some of the kind of sort of main barriers you see people encounter when coming into connection with others? I'm sure it's really multivaried. So if you just want to focus on some specifics, that's fine. But what are some that have come up for you recently in practice?
If you're looking at something like fear, it is protective, but it is disconnecting.
Yeah.
If I fear you, I'm disconnected from you. And all I'm focusing on is the difference between me and you, lacking in empathy for you, all those things. So, I mean, actually, anxiety being dominant, it's somebody's bound to be disconnected from other people. The thing that when I mentioned about dying in there is that the people that are dying tend to preoccupy about telling people they love them, saying thank you, so gratitude,
right,
and forgiving people, asking for forgiveness, but also giving forgiveness, and those are very much, of course, they're connecting qualities. Not forgiving somebody, we do that because we're angry. We don't forgive because we're still angry, and that's fine, isn't it? But you can see that is that threat part dominating. So it's looking at so what are the things that would be disconnecting? As I say, it would generally be fear and anger for people. We're not making any of those things bad. It's just if they dominate, some chronic anger or frustration or irritation are isolating for people. So yes, I mean, those would be the most common things, I suppose. Chronic anger, really, but there is an underlying fear that a lot of people would have. But generally, I mean, if you look at the world at the moment as well, whether that's the environment, the bad news, I've done a few things on that about the social media and the news that people are seeing all the time. That's very distressing. It's very disconnecting for people. It's constant problems. So there are all sorts of ways, I suppose, in which disconnection come in. Somebody might be talking about their anxiety, someone else their anger, someone else their addiction. I mean, fundamentally, if there's shame around addiction, somebody's hiding it. It similarly is a place of disconnection. So I suppose shame would be another way that might manifest. Yeah. So really, unless somebody comes because they've fallen in love with somebody they shouldn't, which would be about connection, I suppose, the vast majority of what people bring is going to be in this sort of territory. And the way often in which they would see the world and others is dominated by these things, these ways of this lens.
Yeah, and I think with connection, an interesting variance in people is how the common term of introvert extrovert.
Yeah.
How varied we are in terms of how many people we need around us to fuel us, and what is supportive of that. And I'm interestingly, in my journey, I've gone from when I was much younger being very extroverted actually towards more introversion in my journey, and then kind of back out the other side. But would you think it's fair to say that is something you need to be quite aware of, because I think it's easy to get burned out around too many interactions, but also then you can retreat into a coping behavior and not have enough interactions. So how have you found that sort of balance?
Yeah, I mean, life? I suppose the thing that like you can work out in therapy in some ways, and it's the same with lots of things, that some people probably describe themselves as introverted if they have a bit of they have social anxiety, and they what I mean is if anxiety is dominating in social interactions, as it may be in life generally, they may believe they are introverted, because what happens in social situations is they are worrying all the time, which is what that threat part will do, about what they're saying, whether somebody liked them, I shouldn't have said that, they don't like me, all those sorts of things, and that's exhausting. So it makes social interactions really problematic. Shame, fear, similarly, people will put up a false self. They don't ever know that somebody that people fully love them, even people they know very well. If we don't tell people what we're thinking and feeling, all of it, to the extent we can do that with another human being, how do we know, how can we trust that we are lovable as we are? So I think there are some people, and there are some extroverted people who would describe themselves as extroverted, I think, who don't necessarily trust their opinion. So the reason they need to talk to lots of other people and check everything with other people is they think other people know things better than them. If you're asking questions, for example, about what I should do with a particular person or what job I should go for, to value other people's views over my own is as well-intentioned mostly as other people are when they give their opinions, could be problematic. So I think an important thing if people say, well, I'm introverted or extroverted, is to look at whether that is authentically who they are.
Yeah.
And absolutely, there are people that will reflect inwards, naturally introverts, and then go out to the world with that. And there are other people that just naturally, congruently will want to not check, but bring things to others and go out to others. But as I say, if you look, how does depression affect that? How does anxiety affect that? How is chronic anger affecting my relationships with others? How does trauma as I grew up meant that I'm self-reliant because I don't actually trust other people very much. I have to do it myself. And somebody in that situation might, for example, describe themselves as introverted, or they have to ask everybody and are always going out to other people, need other people in their lives to feel good. So maybe they describe themselves as extroverted. So I think it's a very interesting subject. And I think, through therapy, it's not that a therapist is going to have the answer, is it? But you can look at yourself aspects. And I think if you turn fear down and turn connection up, that becomes clearer, that it's about personality rather than necessarily a wound. Because there are certain things, I think, ways people have characterized themselves, relationships with sex, for example, where you never quite know whether it's coming from a result of trauma. Probably the same sometimes with I like to be on my own a lot, or I have to be around other people all the time. I'm not pathologizing anything. I'm just saying, how do we work out whether that is authentically, comfortably, happily where somebody is, or where is it something to do with some wound or difficulty in early experience for them?
We have to unpack those introvert, extrovert labels, and we have to unpack our relationship with others and what is thriving and what is coping when it comes towards how we either retreat or sort of gain access to others. So really interesting. A lot of this sort of self-development stuff can be quite serious. You talk about enjoying yourself, and I guess we go through different phases of life where we have more enjoyment, more seriousness. But it struck me in the book you spoke about the skill of enjoying yourself. So, firstly, is that something have you found that's naturally within you, that you've got that skill of enjoying yourself? Is that something you've had to work on?
Yeah, I think it would turning disconnection down and connection up generally, because there's some interesting things around humor. That would be, as far as enjoyment, some people would use that a lot. I remember somebody saying, not to pathologize everything at all, but somebody saying, Stephen King, that humor is almost always anger with its makeup on. So the thing about, there's a lot, I think, and other therapists would say this too, I think, there could be a lot of enjoyment and joy in the therapy room. I would say I'm fundamentally optimistic and hopeful. And I don't think in any way unrealistic human beings' potential to move to a place more of connection than disconnection is. Everybody has that capacity to do that, and a good therapeutic relationship is a great way to do that. So I think there's lots of room for joy and enjoyment, and I will specifically often ask somebody whether they had moments of joy in the last week and what those moments are. There's something which it's called savoring, where people make bigger. I mention it in the book. I don't call it that, but you make bigger joyful moments of connection. You might see a sunset, or have enjoyed a particular moment with a friend, or a book, something that was read, or a podcast. Something had an effect on your body which was about connection, and there's very much something about making that bigger and making those moments of joy bigger. So there'll be a lot of humor in the therapy room. The only thing that we don't want to do, I guess, which often happens for people in the past, is that humor is used to avoid things. And at times, humor is almost always anger with makeup on, could be used, which I think would be in the therapy room, to communicate disliking something as well. So sarcasm, those sorts of things.
Another key that I've seen around me is just people giving themselves permission to enjoy themselves and let loose. And for a lot of people, they don't even have to think about that. But for others, that's important. Lastly, on the sort of 10 points, I've heard you reference in a few podcasts and in your book, and this is in the zeitgeist, is the comparison piece when in relation to others. And obviously, naturally, we will compare ourselves to others. And social media, you've mentioned how others can have a highlight reel. You're seeing other people's highlight reel while you're living the movie. You're seeing the full spectrum of your own life.
Yeah.
what, being realistic in the world we live in, especially for younger people who do engage in a lot of social media, what are kind of some key advice you might give to somebody who is suffering from a lot of comparison, and that being the thief of their joy? Is there any bits of advice you give someone?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very natural place for, particularly with people who are younger. You can see why they do it. I think it's a total fantasy often, isn't it, what somebody's showing, because people's happiness is entirely dependent. It's an internal experience. It's not where they are and what they're wearing, their partner. Their happiness is an entirely internal experience. I would therefore say that I know this might, if only, but comparisons are just pointless. There isn't, to compare my internal experience with somebody else's external appearance. You're comparing two things that are completely different. People can be super wealthy, married to a celebrity, if that's what something that somebody would admire, and be desperately unhappy. So I don't. Somebody did say that follow your envy, and people don't really like that word, and I understand that. But if you're looking at others, thinking I would like that, you can take from it, well, maybe that is something I would like more in my life. But other than that, there is a halo effect, isn't there, where people are of particular attractiveness or famous, or where we think they have a happier life, and maybe they do, maybe they don't, but there's absolutely, to assume that they do is a fantasy. And so it might provide us with some helpful information as far as what we want, so to use it in that way constructively for a young person, but largely it's how we come away from it, on the basis that that's what we do, human beings. It's going to come in, it's intrusive, it's compulsive. What are you going to do then? How are we going to respond to it? As with lots of things, whether that's your fear, your anger, how are you going to speak to it compassionately, but somehow give it the impression that it is of really no help at all, actually.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we're all dealt a different hand, aren't we?
Yeah.
And you just kind of have to sometimes focus on your own hand and accept that. It's kind of pointless comparing yourself to someone else's circumstances.
It is.
So much goes into that.
Yeah. I mean, as I say, it can be helpful to look at others and think, oh, I would like that, and why, and how am I going to do that? But at some point, it very much needs to be taken back in, doesn't it? And somebody's own journey.
No, absolutely. I think that point around envy is quite interesting, actually, kind of digging into envy. That's curious. Being a therapist, I think, is quite a heroic career in a way. You are, I've heard someone describe it as a bit of a contact sport. You're putting yourself into that healing space. You put yourself somewhat in an environment where you're around a lot of potentially distressed or people feeling down. Yeah. So I just would love you to comment how sometimes that impacts you, and maybe some of the methods you use to bring yourself back to a balance. Yeah,
it's interesting, because I would hear a lot people talking about vicarious trauma. So hearing traumatizing stories, and there are certainly stories that I've heard over the years that I still remember now. I think that, as I say, I think therapy is fundamentally hopeful. It is fundamentally optimistic, I would say. I'm not suggesting in any kind of toxic positivity way that if somebody's depressed, then they need to somehow shift when they walk to being optimistic and hopeful. I'm just saying that underneath it all, there's a belief that something can be different. And I absolutely believe, based on experience as well, that's the case. So from that point of view, as difficult as it is sometimes to hear the stories, I don't sort of endlessly get troubled by what I've heard, because to talk about the story is often healing for somebody, because what people often do with difficult and distressing things that have happened to them is move them into the background to get on with life in a way that is not helpful to them, that somehow something was their fault or they were to blame. So actually, to bring something into the present in 2023, whatever year this is being listened to, is more often than not an experience. Of course, people can get distressed while talking about it, but more often than not is a helpful experience for them. And that the difference between believing that something was somebody's fault and then realizing it wasn't can change somebody's life. most people's difficulties have been in relationship, and sometimes those things manifest in the therapy room, but most often this is a different experience. And I have to say, it is also a healing experience for me at times than things that have happened in the past. So actually, more often than not, I would get regulated by what's happening in the therapy room. Occasionally, just stressful things are happening outside and I come in and feel much better. It's not always going to be like that. Of course it's not. I don't want to give anybody a false impression. Anyway, people are going to have different practices, different nervous systems, so it's going to be different for all human beings. It might change from day to day, week to week, but largely I wouldn't do it if it was something that was consistently distressing at all. At moments are, but largely actually, we sort of feel good together, if you know what I mean. That's which would be about bit connection. Connection does feel good, doesn't it? But as I say, there are moments of disconnection, whatever that might look or feel like with somebody. But it is also, I mean, there are times, when people have gone through traumatizing experiences, feel hurt, there are things that happen which are triggering, definitely, in terms of occasionally during sessions. How things are ended, sometimes it can be difficult. So there are things definitely to manage, from that point of view. I suppose in some ways I practice what I preach a lot as far as lots of relationships with outside of therapy, lots of relationships with therapists, lots of friendships with therapists, I suppose, lots of support in that way, exercise, nature, are always, I mean, I would look at it as a say of having a regulated nervous system. When you're in that place, then you are connected and able to connect to others and contain their difficulty and distress too. So there are all sorts of ways in which I would do that. What I use my imagination for, the people that I see, I guess music, all kinds of things.
That's really nice to hear, actually. That's a really warm response. I can really feel that you enjoy what you do. And it sounds like you're building genuine connections, which is what it's all about. And that hopeful lens, I think that hopeful lens is really important. So thank you very much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed chatting with you. Is there anywhere where people can find out more about your work and get your book and hear your stuff? Yeah. So my website is www.thistrustedplace.co.uk, and there's social media links on there, and also links to my podcast and the YouTube channel. I mean, if you put John-Paul Davies into YouTube, it will come up with mine. If you put John-Paul Davies into Apple, the podcast, the same. Nice. Well, John-Paul, thank you for your time on the Mind Forest podcast. You are welcome. Thanks for having me on.